All right. Sarton Bimmons asks, I was 11 for the Cam Newton year at Auburn, so I didn't understand how special of a season he had at the time. If Cam Newton played last season, 2021, what is the worst team that he could drag to a national championship?
I was also 11 that year.
No, we were working at CBS. The 2010 season was our first one with the eye.
Don't you remember? I was Tom Fernelli, the child reporter. He's only 11.
All right, so
no, it couldn't have been. You don't have a parent in media, do you?
No, I don't.
So what are we thinking? Where do you draw? Because the Cam Newton famously, I think it was the only NFL draft pick on the offensive side. Nick Fairley was a stud on a defensive tackle on the defensive side, but you look at the rest of that Auburn starting line, the rest of the depth chart, it was not your typical SEC West national championship contender, especially from the long run of SEC championships of which that was a part. So what kind of squad could Cam Newton, if he had played in 2021 in his 2010 form, what squad could he have dragged to a national championship?
I don't want this to come off as Cam Newton slander, because that season was the most incredible season I've ever seen from a college football player. And it's still the most incredible season I've ever seen from a college football player, in that he single-handedly did carry Auburn to a lot of wins and got them to a national championship, and they won the national title. But I think the worst team last year that Cam Newton could have led to a national title was Michigan. I don't think you're getting past any of the teams that made the college football playoff last year, because the difference is that while Cam was on an Auburn team that, like you just said, Chip, there were no other NFL draft picks on it. But so much has changed in the decade since, as far as the elite of the elite pulling away from everybody else when it comes to recruiting and kind of just hoarding all the 4- and 5-star talent, that although the SEC was really good that year, and it had been good for a while, although, I mean, not saying it was the best conference in football, it wasn't. It actually, if you go back and look at the standings, it wasn't a particularly good year for the SEC, particularly in the East. South Carolina, who won the division and faced Auburn in the SEC championship game, 9-5. But like the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world are so much better than everybody else at this point. So like, if you look at quarterback, maybe he's able to, win a national title with the Wolverines. At Cincinnati, maybe you're able to win your semifinal game, but I don't think you're beating both Alabama and Georgia with Cam Newton at Cincinnati. So I look at that and I just think that as good as he is, and like, look at the Oregon team that he faced in the title game. If that Oregon team, you put them in the playoff right now, last year, is that Oregon team coming within 20 or 30 of whoever it played in the semifinal, whether it was Georgia or Alabama? Because if you look at Auburn's schedule in 2010, they weren't really blowing the doors off of anybody. Like, they beat South Carolina by 8 in the regular season. They beat Kentucky by 3. They had an 18-point or 22-point win over a good Arkansas team. They beat LSU by 7. They blew out a bad Ole Miss team. They blew out Chattanooga. Georgia was pretty mediocre that year. They beat them by 18, but they beat Alabama by 1. And then they only beat Oregon by 3. There were a lot of one-score games. It's not like the Tigers were just destroying opponents. The reason Cam was so effective was because they were in a ton of close games, and in those games, he was the difference maker. I don't think there are nearly as many close games as they would have been then, as far as those teams are concerned. So I think that if he's quarterbacking Michigan last year, the Wolverines are winning the Big Ten, they're getting to the playoff, and maybe they're winning a national title. But even then, I don't think they'd be favored over Alabama or Georgia.
I think you bring up really good points. I initially started this looking at teams that were like, can he drag programs up from 7-5 to a national championship? I had a couple suspects, but then I was like, there's no way. There's no way one player makes that much of a difference. But I was interested in Oregon. Like, I think Oregon was a team last year that maybe you put Cam Newton on it. Because then I was like, all right, were there any rosters that felt like they were a quarterback away, or the quarterback play was pretty rough and then they were able to overcome it? Say maybe the Florida Gators too from last year. Like, just that was kind of my mindset. But I agree with you where you can't just take a team that's around 500 or even, 8-4 and just assume that Cam Newton is going to elevate them, 4 or 5 win differential. But I think he could be the difference in some really good teams being national championship contenders. But I think you have to have pieces around it too. And I think you're right. I mean, that's why I think we need this. That's why there's a problem right now with these 3 teams that have such a separation, because it doesn't matter. You need, the blue chip ratio, which, but you need an entire team to compete with everything these programs have.
And a couple commenters have brought up Clemson, which I think is a good candidate, because Clemson could probably get to the playoff if they have Cam Newton instead of DJU last year, because you combine that with their defense. But is that Clemson team, even with Cam, once it gets to the playoff, are they winning 2 games? I don't know.
Do they have a healthier offensive line than Alabama did?
So that's the thing. What changes? Like, does Cam suddenly heal their offensive line? Does he make the receivers more, threatening because he can
Clemson with DJU played a 10-3 game against the eventual national champions.
Mm-hmm.
I think
they lost.
I think Clemson with Cam Newton is a good option, but I think I can go further down. I started with the final AP top 25, and I was just going down. I said Clemson, okay, 14, but I think that Cam Newton would take a team that was even further down. I think Cam Newton on Arkansas could have turned the Razorbacks into a national championship contender. I look at I look at the Auburn team and like, you do a good job of providing some context for the 2010 season. And it is very tough to go 10 years later with everything that has changed about the game of football and everything that has changed about sort of recruiting and the talent dispersion all across the country. But I think that Arkansas is one of your candidates there. Is Iowa, this is then again, I'm looking at the AP top 25. Is Iowa a team that Cam Newton last year, and factor in all of the, turnovers and points off turnovers, like
Iowa with Cam Newton is Cincinnati.
No, Cam Newton versus Desmond Ridder. That's not a fair comparison.
No, that's an upgrade. But how many draft picks did Cincinnati have last year? 9.
Yeah, they were.
It's not like they were. It's not like they weren't talented. So I mean, they upgraded quarterback. So there's Iowa with Cam Newton last year is the equivalent of Cincinnati. They get to the playoff. I don't think they're winning it.
Oregon.
That was my suggestion.
Yeah,
possible, but does
Does
Mario have Cam handing off 30 times a game?
How about if it is Cam Newton and not Graham Mertz? Does Wisconsin get off to a slow start, and does Wisconsin find itself in a position to be able to? Because that's what I've got to go for here. Is when I'm looking for the comparisons, I'm looking for the defense that's really, really good, but maybe not loaded up with 5 stars. And Wisconsin also fits that bill.
I think it's a similar situation to Iowa, where you get to the playoff, or you might, because that's the thing. Wisconsin would definitely have won the West and they would have reached the Big Ten championship, but there's no guarantee that they beat Michigan if they're there. But when you get to the playoff at that point, like, your advantage at quarterback that you have in the Big Ten with Cam Newton is gone, because you're going up against Bryce Young. So Alabama has a good quarterback too. Georgia's got a defense that's better than yours. So everything that you have the advantage of in the Big Ten in this scenario, you no longer have once you get to the playoff. Because again, the difference these days is Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and now we're seeing Texas A&M kind of catch up. Like you mentioned the blue chip ratio. It's always been you need to be at least 50% to win a national title, or at least no team that's won a national title has had a lower ratio than 50%. But the difference is we're seeing more teams now with like a blue chip ratio in the upper 80s and the lower 90s. That wasn't always the case. Like, it used to be like upper 60s and lower 70s. There's such a funneling of talent to certain programs because the transfer portal now allows you to go. And if it doesn't work out, there's no penalty. You just leave and you can go somewhere else. And it's fine. It's wonderful from that aspect. But one of the unintended consequences is certain programs can hoard talent.
I can't get you past Michigan. Can I get you with an Oklahoma State?
Again, Cam leads a bunch of teams to the playoff, but can he win the national title with him? Not in this day and age. No.
Also, I guess that brings up the great college football playoff BCS era debate as well, where Cam Newton
more parity when there's only 2 teams, Chip.
Cam Newton on Oklahoma State probably gets them undefeated through the regular season. And if they're undefeated conference champs, then they might be able to wind up there at the end of the year. But who gets left out, Georgia or Bama, after they played in the SEC championship game? Like a BCS era allowed for Cam Newton to drag Auburn to a national championship. If Cam Newton is playing for Auburn and that 2010 team plays in the college football playoff, it is very possible, if not likely, that they might not have won the national championship.
Yeah, like the inverse relationship is when there's two teams, there's less access, but there's more likely to be parity as far as who can win it because it just takes one good year. But with an expanded field, you have more teams that could say, we made the playoff, but it's a whole hell of a lot harder to win a title.